Let me tell you a story, but fair warning, it's not one of those feel-good tales wrapped in sunshine and smiles. It's raw, it's real, it's about the kind of heartbreak that leaves cracks in a woman's soul, the kind of betrayal that changes the trajectory of not just one life, but four. And it starts with a man, James Carter, young, handsome, charismatic, and completely unprepared for what it truly means to be a man. James was the kind of boy who turned heads without trying. Even in high school back in Montana, girls whispered his name like a secret. But charm without substance is a dangerous thing. When his mother passed away suddenly, James didn't cope, he escaped. He escaped into fleeting romances with older women, into parties and late nights, into every shallow thrill that numbed the pain. His father, Nicholas, a quiet, honorable man, tried to guide him back. But grief twisted James into someone impulsive, selfish, and eventually completely untethered from responsibility. After high school, James moved to the city for college, and that's when things got worse. He treated relationships like revolving doors, never staying long enough to feel, never committing to anything beyond the night. Love was a game, and he played it well, never thinking he'd one day lose everything because of it. Then he met Jessica. She wasn't like the others. She was shy, modest, and sincere, a textile worker in Springfield, Illinois, who rarely even attended the factory dances. James saw her standing in a corner one evening, clutching her friend's hand like she was clinging to safety. She was a challenge. And James loved a challenge, not because he cared, but because conquering something difficult made him feel powerful. He flirted, he persisted. And eventually, Jessica let her guard down. They didn't date long. He never made any promises, never talked about a future. Jessica, however, being young and untouched by the cynicism of experience, believed what he didn't say more than what he did. She mistook affection for love. And when they finally slept together on a quiet night while her mother was working the hospital night shift, Jessica believed that something sacred had happened between them. 2 weeks later, she missed her period. Then came the doctor's confirmation. She was pregnant. When she told James, he didn't react the way she hoped. There was no joy, no stunned silence filled with wonder. There was only panic, denial, and eventually the worst kind of suggestion a man can make to a woman carrying his child. Maybe you should end it. We're not ready. Jessica's response was firm. I may not be religious, she said, but I won't carry the sin of killing my own child. James backed down, but his silence said everything. What neither of them expected was what came next. Triplets, 3 baby girls, Faith, Hope, and Charity. I want you to picture this: a hospital hallway, the scent of antiseptic in the air, the cries of newborns echoing through cold white walls. James stands frozen outside the maternity ward, his girlfriend lying exhausted inside, having just given birth to 3 tiny human beings, his daughters. And instead of stepping forward to meet them, to touch the fragile miracles he helped create, he turns around and he runs. He doesn't just walk away from the hospital, he disappears. He finalizes his work transfer the very next day, boards a train to Boise, and vanishes from Jessica's world without so much as a goodbye or a backward glance. The father of 3 innocent girls gone before they ever knew his face. This isn't fiction, it's a cautionary tale. One I've seen play out time and again in different forms. A man thinks fatherhood is a choice he can opt into only when he's ready. But life doesn't always wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it throws you into the deep end and demands that you swim. But James didn't swim. He sank and pulled someone else down with him. Jessica, left alone, heartbroken, humiliated. A new mother of 3, standing in a hospital corridor with tears in her eyes, a screaming baby in each arm, and no hand to hold. No partner, no plan, just raw survival. Now, here's where the real story begins. Because what happened next is not just a tale of abandonment, but of resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that shows up when the one who should have never did. But that's for the next part. If this story already has your heart clenching, if you felt that moment when James turned his back on his children like a punch to the gut, then you know why stories like these need to be told. Not for drama, but for the truth, for the women holding it all together, and for the men who need to hear what real responsibility looks like. So if you want to follow this story to the end, if you want to see what happens when real love enters the picture, and when the past dares to return, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon, and help us keep sharing stories that matter. Your support gives us the power to bring you real, emotional, unforgettable narratives every week. And now, before you go, I have a question for you. A simple one, but it might say a lot about how you see the world. If someone abandons their family in the most critical moment, do they ever deserve a second chance? Yes, people make mistakes. Redemption is possible. B, no, some actions cross a line that can't be undone. Drop your answer in the comments. Or B, let's see where your heart stands. There are women who become mothers with a nursery already painted, a crib assembled, and a partner holding their hand through every contraction. Then there are women like Jessica Miller, women who become mothers alone, without comfort, without promises, without certainty. Just pain, instinct, and the terrifying realization that no one is coming to save them. After James disappeared, Jessica didn't speak for nearly a full day. She lay in her hospital bed, silent, staring at the pale ceiling as her 3 newborn daughters cried in staggered rhythms beside her. Faith, hope, charity, their names were chosen in a whisper between contractions, just hours before the truth shattered her world. Names full of meaning, perhaps prophetic, perhaps cruel, given by a mother already exhausted beyond words. She had loved James, or at least, she had loved who she thought he was. But when he turned his back on her and their children, something inside her cracked, not the part that loves, but the part that trusts. And that part would take years to heal. There's a loneliness in early motherhood that few talk about. The kind that creeps in when it's 3 a.m. and you're the only one awake, rocking a crying baby with one arm while trying to soothe another with your voice, praying the third stays asleep. Jessica faced that loneliness times 3. No partner, no income. Just her own mother, Mary, a woman in her early 50s who had long since learned how to quiet her own needs. Mary was the kind of woman who had buried her husband with a straight back and dry eyes, then returned to work at the hospital the next day, practical, grounded, unshakable, and when her daughter came home from the hospital carrying 3 new lives and no support system, Mary didn't scold. She didn't cry, she simply opened the door wider and made room. The house was small, barely more than a cottage with 2 bedrooms and a narrow kitchen, but it became the cradle for this broken little family. Jessica tried to breastfeed all 3, but her body, already weakened by a difficult birth and emotional trauma, couldn't keep up. She cried in silence as Mary woke early every morning to line up at the city's milk kitchen, bringing home bottles of formula donated by strangers who would never know whose babies they were feeding. There were nights when Jessica sat on the edge of her bed and wondered what it would be like to just not wake up, to close her eyes and never have to feel the ache of failure, the terror of not being enough. But every time she looked down at her daughters, tiny, helpless, oblivious to the pain she carried, she pushed those thoughts back. They didn't ask to be born into this storm. They didn't deserve a mother who disappeared like their father had. So she stayed and fought and broke in secret. Mary watched her daughter with quiet worrying. She knew the signs, knew what it looked like when a woman smiled for her children's sake, but had stopped smiling for herself. She brought Jessica to the local clinic, where a kind nurse gave her a mild herbal remedy to help with anxiety, safe for breastfeeding, but hardly strong enough to calm the emotional war inside her. Still, it was something, and in those early months, something was everything. Neighbors stepped in, bringing vegetables from their gardens, eggs from backyard hens. A friend from Mary's hospital donated diapers, second-hand clothes, even toys her own grandchildren had outgrown. It wasn't much, but it stitched a fragile net beneath the family one Jessica clung to while learning how to keep her babies fed, warm, and alive. She began to move in rhythms, like someone dancing to a song only she could hear: diaper, bottle, burp, repeat. Faith was the loudest, hope the most curious, and charity the smallest, clung to her mother's heartbeat as if afraid of losing her too. Jessica memorized their cries, learned the meaning behind every whimper. She became fluent in their language, even when she couldn't find her own words. But the hardest part wasn't the exhaustion or the isolation. It was the fear that she wouldn't be enough. That one illness, one job denial, One unexpected bill could send them all spiraling into a life she never imagined for her children. There were no safety nets, no second incomes, no father to step in and carry the burden when her shoulders gave out. She had nothing but her mother and herself, and yet there were moments of light. When all three girls fell asleep on the floor together after a bath, their tiny bodies tangled like kittens, Jessica would sit beside them and cry not from sadness, but from awe. They were hers, somehow, in the middle of her own personal hurricane. She had created something beautiful. 3 reasons to keep fighting, 3 hearts to protect. When the girls turned 6 months old, a neighbor, an old seamstress who had long since retired, showed up with a gift, a handmade triple stroller. Built from the remains of 2 others. You need your hands free, she said with a wink. You'll need them to take on the world, and slowly, Jessica did. She began to take the girls for walks in the park, her back a little straighter with each passing week. She made eye contact again, she started conversations. And while the shame of being left never fully left her, she began to transform it not into bitterness, but into resolve. She would never be that girl again, the one who mistook charm for character, the one who let a man's presence define her worth. Her daughters would grow up knowing what it looked like when a woman stood back up after being abandoned, when she chose to be both mother and father, protector and nurturer, broken and strong at the same time. That's what this chapter of Jessica's story is about. Not tragedy, but triumph. Not survival in spite of pain, but because of it. And that is something no one, not even James Carter, could ever take away from her. Nicholas Carter had always believed that a man's legacy wasn't built by what he left behind, but by how he showed up when it mattered most. He'd spent his life working as an engineer at a classified government facility in Boise, Idaho, long hours, long winters, and a house that had felt too quiet ever since his wife passed away. The day his son James walked into the apartment with a suitcase and a hollow stare, Nicholas had known something was terribly wrong. But even then, he hadn't imagined the depth of his son's betrayal. When James finally told him flatly, coldly, that his girlfriend had given birth to triplets and he'd run before even seeing them, Nicholas felt something collapse in his chest. He'd raised James to be better, or at least, he thought he had. But somewhere along the line, the boy had learned charm without substance, pride without principle, and worst of all, the illusion that responsibility was optional. They didn't fight that night. Nicholas didn't yell. He simply stared at the son, who now looked more like a stranger, and said, "You'll stay in the 1-bedroom apartment down the block. I don't want to see you for a while," and that was that. But time doesn't quiet a man's conscience, it amplifies it. Nicholas couldn't stop thinking about the girl his son had abandoned, or the 3 baby girls who had entered this world already missing half their origin story. What kind of life would they have? Were they safe? Did they have enough to eat? Did they even have cribs to sleep in? James wouldn't talk about it. He refused to share an address. Cut off every inquiry with a shrug or silence, so Nicholas waited and hoped. And quietly carried the guilt of a father whose son had become a coward. Almost a year later, James came knocking again, not for reconciliation, for money. He wanted a plane ticket to California for a vacation, said he needed a break. Nicholas saw an opening and gave him a condition. "Give me the address of the mother of your children, and I'll pay for your trip. But don't lie to me." To his surprise, James did. That very week, Nicholas packed a bag, cancelled his work meetings, and boarded a bus to Springfield, Illinois. He didn't tell anyone, didn't plan beyond finding them, but he knew he couldn't live another year without trying to make it right. The search wasn't easy. He walked the city for days, asking discreet questions. At last, a conversation with a market vendor led him to a quiet park near the edge of town. And there, under a canopy of trees, he saw them, 3 identical girls with red gold curls playing by a fenced-in playground. A young woman sipping coffee beside an older woman who watched the children with a gaze full of both weariness and love. Jessica, he almost didn't approach. He felt like a ghost haunting a life he'd never belonged to. But when Jessica looked up and recognized him, her reaction wasn't what he expected. No anger, just a quiet, steady acknowledgement. "Hello, Nicholas," she said. He introduced himself formally, out of respect, then turned to the woman beside her. "You must be Mary. I want to say, I'm sorry." "I failed to raise a better man," Mary nodded, tight-lipped, her silence speaking volumes. But Jessica didn't shut the door. She invited him to lunch. Asked him to come to their modest home on Apricot Street. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a beginning. And Nicholas, worn from guilt, aching with years of regret, knew better than to waste a second chance. He arrived later that day carrying gifts he had carefully chosen: dolls, clothes, learning toys, even envelopes with savings for each child. It wasn't an apology in words, but in action. It was the language of a man who'd missed too much and wanted desperately to earn back a little dignity. As the girls napped in the next room, Nicholas spoke with Mary, and for the first time in years, he confessed the truth, not just about James, but about his own regrets. How he had failed to notice his son slipping. How he had been so consumed by work after his wife died that he hadn't given James the guidance a boy needs. How he had watched the boy grow into a man he didn't recognize and had done too little, too late. Mary listened, not with softness, but with a quiet grace that only women like her possess. The kind of women who have seen pain, survived it, and no longer need to say every thought aloud. She told him the truth, too, that she was exhausted, that Jessica had nearly broken under the weight of abandonment, that they had made it only by clinging to one another and the kindness of neighbors. "I don't blame you for James," she finally said. "But if you want to be part of their lives, don't disappear like he did." "I won't," Nicholas said, and he meant it. In the weeks that followed, he returned again and again. He took the girls on walks, learned their rhythms, their quirks. Faith was bold, always the first to speak. Hope loved puzzles and could stay focused for hours. Charity clung to her mother like a shadow, but slowly warmed to Nicholas, especially when he brought fruit-flavored candies in his coat pocket. He couldn't replace James. He didn't try. What he offered was something simpler and perhaps more important: presence, dependability, unwavering love that didn't need to be earned. One day, sitting on a bench in the backyard while the girls played in the grass, he turned to Mary and said, "I have a plan. It's bold, but I think it could change everything." He told her about a property just outside the city, a 2-story home built by an old army friend who was relocating. It bordered a small forest, had space for a garden, a basement garage, and most importantly, enough rooms for everyone. He could buy it. He wanted to. Mary was skeptical at first. It felt too sudden, too generous. But Nicholas wasn't offering charity, he was offering partnership. A way to rebuild a broken family, even if the pieces no longer fit perfectly. They moved in that November. Jessica had doubts. Naturally, trust was slow to grow. But when she saw how her daughters smiled at Nicholas, how he fixed leaky faucets without being asked, how he read bedtime stories and carried groceries and never once asked for praise, something in her softened. Over time, the house on the edge of the forest became more than shelter. It became a sanctuary. The girls had their own room. Mary had space to garden again. Jessica found moments of peace she hadn't felt since before the pregnancy. They weren't a traditional family, but they were in every way that mattered. Whole. Nicholas retired that spring. Took a job with the forestry department to stay active. Each morning, he woke early to make breakfast, pack lunches, and drive the girls to daycare. He drove Mary to her hospital shifts. He tended the garden in the afternoons. At night, he sat on the porch, watching the stars, grateful for a second chance to matter. This was his redemption, not because he changed his son, but because he chose to love the children his son couldn't, and in doing so, he proved that it's never too late to become the man you were supposed to be, not by blood, but by choice. In every story of heartbreak, there's always a moment when life gently tests the heart again, not to see if it can be broken, but to see if it can still open. For Jessica Miller, that moment came quietly, in the form of a man named William Harris. William wasn't the type of man who swept women off their feet with grand gestures or flashy words. He was steady, grounded, the kind of man whose presence didn't scream for attention but stayed, noticed, listened. After being promoted to interim department head at the textile factory where Jessica worked, he made it his mission to understand not just the production quotas, but the people behind them. That's when he noticed her. Jessica was different from the others. She didn't linger in the break room gossiping. She didn't seek recognition. She came to work on time, did her job with quiet precision, and left as soon as her shift was done, presumably to pick up her children. There was a kind of guardedness about her, like someone who had seen the storm and was now learning how to live in the calm without expecting it to last. What William saw wasn't just a beautiful woman, he saw resilience. He saw the mother in her, the protector, the quiet warrior who carried more than most but never complained. That drew him to her more than anything else. One afternoon, during a casual team lunch he'd organized to improve morale, William asked Jessica if she'd like to join. She hesitated, offering a polite smile and an excuse about needing to pick up her daughters from daycare. That could have been the end of it, another opportunity quietly slipping by, but William didn't let it. He walked with her toward the gate after the shift ended. "I know you have responsibilities," he said, "but I also know that sometimes the people who carry the most weight deserve a little break the most. Let me arrange everything. I'll speak with your family. Make sure you get home safely. Just join us if only for an hour." Jessica paused. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to her like that, with kindness, not pity, respect, not judgment. And something in his voice made her feel safe. She went. That night, under the soft hum of conversation and the low flicker of candles at a small cafe table, Jessica laughed for the first time in what felt like years. It wasn't loud or attention-seeking, it was the kind of laugh that slipped out before you realize it, surprising even yourself. William didn't try to impress her, he simply asked about her life, her girls, her dreams, what little time and space had left of them. He told her about his childhood, growing up as the eldest of 4 younger sisters who were twins, and a brother he was fiercely protective of. He spoke about his parents' modest home, about working odd jobs through college, about his belief that leadership wasn't about control, but service. And when he spoke about children, there was no hesitation in his eyes, only affection. That's when Jessica understood this man wasn't afraid of her reality. He wasn't intimidated by the fact that she came with 3 daughters and a history marked by abandonment. If anything, it seemed to deepen his interest in her. Their connection didn't ignite like a wildfire, it grew like a garden. Quietly, deliberately, with care. William never rushed her. Never made her feel like she owed him anything for his attention. Instead, he showed up at daycare pickups, on grocery runs, bringing small surprises for the girls, a book, a new hair ribbon, a warm scarf for winter. Faith was the first to warm to him, always the boldest. Hope followed soon after, often climbing into his lap with a puzzle or a question. Charity, ever cautious, took the longest, but William waited, never pushing. And when she finally reached for his hand during a walk in the park, Jessica watched the moment unfold with tears in her eyes. It wasn't just her heart that was healing, it was theirs. Nicholas, ever the observant patriarch, had watched William closely from the start. He hadn't forgotten the betrayal of his own son, but as weeks turned into months, he saw something different in William. A steadiness, a willingness, a love that was patient, not performative. One evening, while the girls played in the yard and Jessica set the table, Nicholas leaned over and said quietly, "If your intentions with my girls are true, then I welcome you." William nodded. "They are." And so, under the soft light of a late September sky, William proposed. Not with a grand speech or an audience, but at home, over tea, surrounded by the people who mattered most. He knelt down in front of Jessica, the girls giggling behind him, and asked if she would let him build a life with them, not just her, but all of them. She said yes. The wedding was simple but full of joy. The ceremony took place in the backyard with handmade decorations, home-cooked food, and a circle of friends who had become family. Jessica wore a soft ivory dress gifted by a neighbor. The girls wore matching bows. William, beaming, vowed not just to love his wife, but to raise her daughters as his own. And he kept that vow. He adopted them formally within weeks. Took on the title of dad with both pride and humility. He taught them how to ride bikes, how to tie shoelaces, how to tell the difference between right and wrong. He stayed up during storms to comfort them, learned how to braid hair, painted their rooms in the colors they chose. He didn't replace James, he erased the absence he left behind. Jessica, once guarded, began to blossom again. With William by her side, she found room to dream. They planted a garden, took weekend trips, made plans not just for survival, but for joy. This wasn't the life she had planned. But it was, in every way, the life she deserved. Because love, when it's real, doesn't just arrive, it shows up. Every day, in small ways, in hard moments. And when it does, it doesn't ask you to forget the past. It simply says, I'm here now, let's build something better. The knock on the door came just as the sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the porch. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn chill that whispered of change. Inside the house, the kitchen was filled with warmth, dinner bubbling on the stove, children's laughter echoing from upstairs, and the quiet rhythm of a family preparing for another ordinary evening. But that knock was anything but ordinary. William Harris opened the front door and found himself staring at a face he hadn't seen in years, one that bore a striking resemblance to the three little girls upstairs. James Carter stood on the porch, suitcase in hand, expression torn somewhere between guilt and defiance. He was older, maybe a little thinner, but the same in all the ways that mattered. Behind him, the family dog barked incessantly, refusing to let the stranger pass without a warning. "What are you doing here?" William asked, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. James didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the window, where the shadows of his daughter's triplets he hadn't seen since the moment they were born flickered against the curtain. His voice was steady when it finally came, but there was something forced about it. "I came to see my kids. I brought gifts. School's starting soon. They deserve to know who their real father is." William's expression didn't change. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. But there was a line drawn clear in his voice. "They already have a father, and it's not you." James stepped forward, stubbornness rising. "You don't get to make that decision. They're mine." "No," William said, "you had that right. And you gave it up the day you ran out of that hospital, the day you left them. You don't get to walk back in just because it's convenient now." Inside, Jessica watched through the window, her chest tight. Mary stood beside her, arms folded, gaze steely. "Let William handle it," she whispered. "You don't need to carry this again." But Jessica couldn't stay back. This was her battle too. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. James looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. Gone was the girl he once charmed so easily. In her place stood a woman steady, self-assured, tired perhaps, but unshakable. "Jess," he said softly, "I just want to talk." She studied him for a long moment before answering. "Talk about what?" "About how you left me alone with 3 newborns. About how you vanished without a word, like we were just a mistake you regretted." James opened his mouth to respond, but she didn't let him. "You know, for a long time, I hoped you'd come back," she said, her voice calm. "Not because I wanted you, but because I didn't want our daughters to grow up thinking they were unwanted. But you stayed gone, year after year. While they learned to walk, to talk, to read, you were nowhere." "I wasn't ready," James said, and this time his voice cracked. "I was scared," Jessica nodded. "So was I, but I didn't run." James's eyes filled with something like remorse. But remorse isn't the same as redemption. "And it never arrives on time. I've changed," he said. "I've been working, I've been in therapy. I think about them every day. I want to be part of their lives." "And what would that look like?" Jessica asked. "You show up twice a year with a gift. You take them for ice cream and think that makes up for a lifetime of silence. They're my daughters." "No," William said, stepping in again, "they're my daughters. I was there when they took their first steps. I held them during fevers. I stayed up all night when they had nightmares. I taught them how to ride bikes, how to spell their names, how to believe they were enough. You're not a father because you share DNA. You're a father because you show up." James turned to Jessica, pleading, "Now, please, just let me see them." Jessica's answer came without hesitation. "No," he blinked. "No." She shook her head. "They don't know you. They've never asked about you. And I'm not going to introduce confusion into their lives just to ease your guilt. You want forgiveness, James, forgive yourself. But don't ask us to help you do it." James stood there, stunned. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue, press further. But then he saw it, the resolve in William's eyes, the quiet finality in Jessica's voice, and something else, the sound of laughter from inside, from the very girls he had walked away from. He realized then that the space he had once occupied had long been filled. Not replaced, filled, not with bitterness, but with love. Real love, earned love. He turned without another word. Walked down the steps, suitcase trailing behind him. The dog barked one last time as if to say, "Don't come back." Jessica stood on the porch long after he left, watching the sun dip below the trees. William slid an arm around her waist, and she leaned into him. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I am now." Inside the house, Faith and Hope were arguing over who got the last scoop of mashed potatoes. Charity was singing to her doll, completely unaware of what had just transpired outside. And that was exactly how Jessica wanted it. Their world remained untouched, unshaken, full of the kind of love that shows up not when it's easy, but when it's hardest. That night, as they tucked the girls into bed, Jessica whispered to William, "Thank you for fighting for us." William kissed her forehead, "Always." And somewhere, far down the road, James Carter sat alone in a motel room, staring at a photo he had printed from Jessica's old blog. 3 girls, smiling wide, their eyes bright. His daughters by blood, perhaps, but not by heart. He had missed the chance to be a father, and no matter how much he wanted to go back, some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. In the quiet aftermath of James's return, a heavy truth hung in the air, one that no argument, apology, or plea could erase. Some absences are louder than any presence, and in the story of Jessica and her daughters, we are reminded that love is not a promise spoken once, but a choice lived out every day. The world often glorifies grand gestures, the comeback, the apology. The man who returns, flowers in hand, asking for another chance. But real life doesn't always follow the arc of redemption. Sometimes, the most powerful act of love is choosing not to reopen a wound, even when the one who caused it finally comes knocking. Jessica's strength wasn't in how she endured James's abandonment, it was in how she built something beautiful without him. And Nicholas's redemption didn't come from fixing his son, but from stepping up where his son had failed. William's quiet heroism lay not in any dramatic rescue, but in the daily, humble act of showing up for the girls, for Jessica, for a future none of them thought they'd have. This story is not just about a broken family and a father's failure. It's about the resilience of women, the quiet strength of men who love without ego, and the way that time reveals a person's true character not by what they say, but by what they do day after day. Faith, hope, and charity will grow up not knowing the full weight of the pain their mother once carried, and that's exactly the point. They won't remember the nights Jessica cried into her pillow, or the exhaustion she pushed through, or the judgmental stares she once endured. They will remember the bedtime stories, the birthday cakes, the triple stroller that squeaked through the park trails. They will remember love, because in the end, what defines a parent is not biology. It's presence, it's patience, it's the willingness to sit beside a child when they're sick, to show up at school concerts, to braid their hair even when your fingers are clumsy. It's showing up when it's hard, and for the rest of us, this story offers a mirror. It asks us, what does it really mean to be a father? A mother, a partner, a family. It's not always about being perfect. Sometimes, it's just about being there. So what's the lesson? It's this: in life, people will disappoint you. Some will walk away, some will return too late. But healing doesn't come from waiting for their apology. Healing comes from building your own peace, choosing who gets to stay in your life, and believing that love, real love, is still possible, even after the worst pain. Jessica's story is every single parent's story, every abandoned child's fear, every broken heart's question, will I ever be whole again? And her answer, lived out in quiet courage, is yes. Not just whole but stronger, wiser, and more fiercely protective of her joy than ever before. And so, wherever you are in your own story, whether you're the one who left, the one who was left, or the one learning to love again, remember, your next chapter is still being written. You get to decide how it unfolds. Let me ask you this simple question. Do you believe someone who abandoned their family can ever earn their way back? A yes If they truly change and show up consistently, some choices cannot be undone. Kindly leave your answer in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective, and so would many others in our growing community. If this story touched something deep inside you, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you'd like to go a step further, any donation, no matter how small, goes a long way to help me continue sharing stories like this. I'm no longer young, but I believe that using my remaining years to offer something meaningful to the world is the best thing I can do. Your support gives me the strength to keep going, so thank you, truly, for being here. Let's keep building a world where love shows up every day.